I was born Margaret Dunkley Shaw. Then I married John and I became Margaret Dunkley Hayes. I would go dancing at the Queen's dance place on the promenade at Cleves. And from there we met Bernard, who was the saxophone player in at the orchestra there. That was Bernard. And he introduced me to John, but he wanted to be in the RAF, so that was it. And then he did his first training in Blackpool.
I'm Andrew Masters. This is my wife Alice. We have been married now for 19 years, and we first met at the Women's Army Centre in Guildford 21 years ago. I was recovering from being blown up in Ireland, and Alice just finished training, I believe.
Yeah, it's my first posting. It was an admin job for the new recruits coming in. I worked in the section that they came to be selected, selection centre.
I was posted back into the kitchen, but I still had a neck brace on, quite a pronounced limp, and my left arm was still in plaster, in a sling.
Yeah.
Trying to work my way around the kitchen one-handed, taking things in and out the oven. And Alice used to come in from the selection centre each morning to collect milk, and basically, because I was there nearly all day, we sort of met that sort of way.
Yeah.
First of all, my first impressions, we didn't particularly like each other,
No.
which I think happens quite often. But we found out we both liked playing squash, so we sort of played quite often, 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
This is John's diary. So I'm just going to read to you on the Saturday, our wedding day, and it was sunny for a change. And we're married at the Sacred Heart Church at 3:15. Then we came back to Cleves and had tea at Mother's and stayed at Mrs. Bolton's for our honeymoon. Unfortunately, we couldn't do very much in the short time that he had. 29th, and this was the last entry, I think. Work again. We had a raid, 24 to 30 bombs dropped. It frightened the life out of me. I'm sorry. I was a nervous wreck. What a night. 1st of November, early morning. The camp was bombed again, and 11 of them were killed. It was one of our bombers that they had no... This was on the Friday morning, and I didn't get my notification until Saturday tea time. It had taken me so long to dig them out.
You had a really good time, but it's also one of the saddest times as well, was it?
It was. We lost one of our officers. He was in a helicopter crash in Besbrook in Ireland, and that was extremely hard, very sad. I think it was the first time I'd lost someone that wasn't family. I met his wife and his children, and I think that made it harder.
But there was also the time we've both been to funerals and cremations. So we were at one 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And it's just one of these things you just cope with things. But this was a full military funeral that had the Guard of Honour. It was quite an occasion. I mean, I made my own way there. Alice came down from London in the transport provided by the department, and we were all in full kit. Parties marched in. It was gun salutes, and then we each took our turn, passed the coffin sort of thing, and saluted and had our last sort of farewell. Chatted to the family. And the wife lived there was really, they were really nice. A really nice family. but it was the first time we'd been in a situation where it was a military funeral. I mean, I've lost people, friends have been killed, but in situations where I never actually was in to go to the funerals, mainly in Falklands, Gulf, things like this, which they died. We were still on active service. They were repatriated and buried, and we were still over there. I did find that once I'd finally left the army, I was very much on my own. There are organisations that you can approach. The Soldiers, Sailors and Air Force Association is one of them. But I found that once I'd left the army, that was it. I wanted to keep a definite line between my civilian life and my army life now. I'd finished with the army. There's nothing else they could do really. They weren't going to do any more operations. They weren't going to do anything like this. So I had to do that myself then via my own general practitioner and all this sort of stuff. And that's the bit I found was the hardest, was finding a GP that understood what I'd been through. The worst effect of all these sort of things is also is that I have a lot of symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Although it's not diagnosed as that, it is recognised that it's borderline post-traumatic stress. But I also suffer depression very badly, and all these are sort of side effects and knock-on effects of, and subconscious effects of situations that I've been in, the war zones. Like I said before, I was in Falklands, I did the first Gulf, I was also in Bosnia. I've been seeing some of the mass graves over in Bosnia. The fact is that sometimes in the war zones, and you end up by shooting somebody, you can actually see the person, and that's the hardest thing. That really, sort of, even now I still wake up panicky and regrets and all these sort of things have added into the depression side of it, and that's the hardest thing to try and cope with. The fact is that you've killed somebody. Having lost my brother through just a medical condition, he just had a brain aneurysm, blood vessel in his brain ruptured, and basically killed him. He was the youngest of four, he was the fittest out of them, he'd never had a day off sick. And having know what my family had gone through, losing my brother in that, knowing how the parents of the people I've killed must be going through, it's really, really hard. I'm lucky with Alice. Alice understands it. She's very, very patient with me. Yeah,
So funny.
we have a good laugh. We've had rough times and bad times, but on the whole, I won't change anything. I thoroughly enjoyed it and would recommend it to anybody. Even now, I mean, the people out in Afghanistan and Iraq and all this sort of stuff, you don't hear so much about Iraq, although they're still over there doing a fine job. And I feel for them, and sometimes I'm quite envious of them being in that situation. That's a lot of the people join the army because they want to serve their country, they want to do something, they want to. Specific, especially the Marines and the fighting forces, the support forces. I always want to support them. That's why they join, to be support. So the fighting forces want to go and fight, and yes, we've lost 267 soldiers now. But if you do speak to any of them, none of them would have changed. Nothing changed. Perhaps the final part, they wouldn't want to be when they particularly want to be dead. But the whole situation, everything that got them in the situation where they were, it's what they trained for. It's what they wanted to do. And I admire them so much for it now.
Makes you proud.